Good morning, Trinity family.
Good morning.
Let me first say Happy Mother's Day to all your moms out there. The gospel that we heard today is from the 14th chapter of the Gospel of John. You could think of this part of John's gospel as the top of a bell-shaped curve. The first part of the gospel, the building up, are what called Jesus' signs and miracles. Up to this point in the gospel, we read that Jesus miraculously healed a man who could not walk. Jesus miraculously fed 5,000 people with only a few loaves of bread and a few fish. Jesus heals a man born blind. And Jesus even raises his friend Lazarus from the dead. And after this section in the gospel we read this morning, we start to come back down to the second part of the gospel. Jesus being betrayed, Jesus being put on trial, Jesus being crucified, and Jesus being raised from the dead and appearing to his disciples. So this passage that we just heard is part of the top of this bell-shaped curve. And truthfully, it serves as kind of a transition. Now, the context of this is that Jesus is having a meal, a supper, the Last Supper, with his friends. And at that supper, we are told that Judas had gone out. Jesus knew what that meant. Jesus knew what was about to happen. But those disciples sitting around that table didn't know. This is a pivotal scene. It is inviting you to lean in, to pay attention to this entire scene. I have shared over the past that having been an ordained priest is a special and sacred privilege. And some of those most sacred and privileged times have been being with someone on their deathbed. And often in those moments, you hear them pass on some bit of wisdom or some wishes, something that they want to make sure that you hear. That is what the disciples are experiencing here. It's as if Jesus is trying to pass on life's wisdom in the very little time that he has left with them. And so, here, it's clear. There are no parables, no stories. Instead, Jesus just gets right to the point. In fact, he does something unusual. He gives an order. He gives a command. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Love me. Love one another. If you do that, keeping my commandments will come naturally. It'll just be in your nature. So concentrate on love. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. That's it. That's it. A New Testament scholar said that this new commandment is so simple enough for a toddler to memorize it, and profound enough that most mature believers are repeatedly embarrassed by how poorly they comprehend it, let alone put it into practice. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when they see the love you have for each other. A year or so ago, a friend and clergy colleague of mine shared with me a video. It was essentially a short man or person on the street video. And basically, this person went around with their camera asking people two questions. The first question was, what do you think of Jesus? What words come to mind when you hear Jesus? And these are some of their responses. Good guy. Love. Compassion. Diversity. Easter. Loving, bearded, and kind dude. My Savior. Pretty cool. I like him a lot. Generous. Giving. Peaceful. Sincere. And then the person then asked the second question. What do you think of Christians? What words come to mind when you hear Christian? And those same people that gave those same responses to Jesus said, out of touch, psycho, backward, extreme, dangerous, like my Uncle Bob, narrow-minded, fanatical, rigid, threatening, overpowering, the kind of people you really do not want to know. And one person said, nothing good, and simply turned around and walked away. My brothers and sisters, that's a problem. There is a huge, huge valley between Jesus, the founder of our faith, and Christians, the followers of Jesus. Why is that? Well, there are a lot of theories and thoughts out there as to why. But a writer and preacher named Greg Jones, I thought, did the best job of explaining it. In a biblical commentary, he wrote, Jesus wanted to make it easy for us by having us focus on this one thing. He does not talk about the importance of the Bible or a carefully constructed creed. The New Testament would not even be written until 2 generations after Jesus' death. And the Nicene Creed would be hammered out by combative theologians over the next 350 years. The Bible and the Creed would become terribly important to human beings over the years, while the one thing most important to Jesus would get lost as Christians wrestled over orthodoxy and power. What Jesus wanted us to know, apparently, was that although people would fight wars over who held correct beliefs, this was not Jesus' primary concern. Jesus' way was the way of little children, not the way of learned theologians or intelligent preachers. Little children, he said, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. The commandment is not about what you believe. It's about how you live. It has long occurred to me that throughout history, God's people have this tendency to make belief more important than practice. And it goes all the way back to Jesus' time. Do you remember the story of the legal expert walking up to Jesus and asking him the question, which commandment of the law is the greatest? Now I'm about to defend lawyers. Because in that lawyer's defense, it could have been a well-intentioned question. Remember that there aren't just the 10 commandments, but more like 613 commandments. There are like something 248 positive commandments. You shall. While there's something in the area of 365 negative commandments. You shall not. So this lawyer might be curious. He might be wondering, among all those commandments, how should we sort them? How do we prioritize them? Which is the greatest? Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That is what everything else depends on. That. So those of you who are being confirmed, received, reaffirming your faith, baptized, that is it. Love God, love neighbor, love self. The whole Bible summarized in one sentence. There is a famous story told about John of Patmos, or John the Divine, the author of the book of Revelation. It was towards the end of his life, and he had agreed to give one last sermon. The place was jam-packed. Everybody was waiting to hear from this wise sage, this prophet. What would he say on this grand occasion? So John pulled himself up slowly to speak, stood up straight, took a deep breath. Love each other, he said. Then he sat down.